Welcome to the Be and BAME, the podcast that puts a spotlight on Black professionals and their journeys, triumphs, tribulations, and stories of excellence. On today's episode, Siji speaks with Ade Adeyemi, a global health policy expert who recently received an MBE for his services to global health. As well as finding out more about Ade's achievements, they speak about unlikely heroes, the complexity of the term BAME, why accepting an MBE could be considered problematic for a Black person, the protests in Nigeria, and why social media and the media as a whole lack accountability. They also discuss the importance of achieving an equitable worldwide solution to COVID and how someone can become a global policy expert. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode, and you can follow us on Instagram at the Be and BAME. We'll also be uploading the video of the interview to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe, and please let us know what your thoughts and comments are.
So today I'm joined by Ade Adeyemi MBE. His LinkedIn title says he is on a mission to dream up global super solutions to healthcare workforce and leadership challenges. And from the research I've done, he's certainly on the road to doing that. Ade is a global health policy expert who has accomplished a lot in his career so far. And as of October 2020, Black History Month, he was awarded an MBE. So he has a very impressive resume and currently serves as the Fellowship Director of the Centre for Universal Health at Chatham House, as well as holding a senior position with the NHS as well. So like I said, his CV reads extremely well. Maybe Ade, you can start by just giving us a quick tour of your CV and what you've achieved so far.
Well, thank you, Siji, for having me. My CV and what I've achieved so far. I don't know where I start. Well, perhaps, I studied pharmacy. I then thought, as I was about to become a pharmacist, actually, maybe I could have more impact if I thought about policy. And I had an interest in kind of thinking creatively about problems and things. So rather than the chemistry and kind of pharmaceutical, mathematical artistry of delivering healthcare, I thought about the other artistry of delivering healthcare, which is through policy. So I did a master's in the philosophy of medicine and science, and then I started getting more involved in the policy world through the Mayor of London's office. I then joined a management consulting firm who worked with pharmaceutical companies, and it's been an iterative process ever since of then doing an MBA to kind of have more impact. And I now find myself at NHS England NHS Improvement, which is like the central policy governing arm of the NHS. And I've started a part-time PhD in global health at King's College, London. So the learning process has always been there, and the desire to have more impact has always been through the CV.
Okay, so that early shift towards the policy side of things.
Early shift, very early shift, where I think there's a bit of a debater in me internally. I say debater and definitely not arguer or provocateur, but someone who wants to have discussions about the problems. And I saw in most clinical roles, I was never smart enough to be a doctor, but I saw in most clinical roles that opportunity wasn't always as clear. So I wanted to get into in pivot towards policy.
Okay, you said you were a bit of a debater. So, I mean, what experiences or things would you say have enabled kind of you getting to where you are now?
What experiences? So the comical but very true one actually is Judge Judy. It's a daytime TV show. Yeah. There's a judge called Judy Shineline, who watches over cases. And I loved it. Batman is my other hero. And, there's a sense of justice and like arguing and fighting, oftentimes, physical with Bruce, but fighting for justice, fighting for a world you believe in. That just caught my imagination as a younger person and kind of stayed with me ever since. I had so many other examples as well, growing up in East London, where it was obvious to me that, fighting for your rights, so to speak, speaking up, was important for the advancement of good stuff in society. And so I just, always carried that through to my career. And I always thought, if you enjoy what you're doing, then it doesn't feel like work. And so I enjoy thinking creatively about policy, addressing political problems, it's politics with a lowercase p. That's definitely been an influence.
Okay. So Judge Judy and Batman who inspired you and influenced you.
Yeah, Judge. So my heroes are Judge Judy, Batman, and Jesus. Probably in reverse order, but yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting because all of those different figures are not always looked upon fondly, but they ultimately try and do good. And that's a kind of.
And you know what? That's a really good point, actually, because there's something about our human nature that we can hold two opposing truths at the same time. We're very complex people, and the characters of Batman in particular bear that to the very core. That multi-billionaire white guy, by day, but then tries and helps people at night in a very dark, twisted way. There's justice there. He's a complex character. Judge Judy is a very direct, voracious character, but does good at the same time. And so there's something very interesting about those complex characters who seem, who their flaws are kind of quite obvious, but they are people that you root for and like ultimately, and you want them to do good because they're trying to do good in the world.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I've started discovering since, starting this podcast. Actually, it's just when I hear about different people's stories, and actually it's not always clear cut, but there's a lot of complexity there, even with the people that I'm interviewing. Like, it just shows as humans, we are complex beings. And even though the podcast is called The Be in Vain, so shining the spotlight on, Black stories of Black excellence and inspiring Black people, actually the definition of inspiring itself is up for interpretation, isn't it? Because what one person's inspired by isn't necessarily what someone else is. So that complexity of character is quite interesting. And sorry, go.
No, and what I love about even the kind of concepts of B and BAME is it's starting to unpack what BAME people have been denied, which is the awareness of complexity. BAME is complex. We know that. Even within Black, you have Caribbean, you have African, and within African you've got East African, West African, and even within West African you've got Ghanaian and Nigerian, and those cultures are very different. Within Nigeria you've got Yoruba, Igbo, and so there's a complexity about ourselves that we're just denied because we're just lumped with the people from Indonesia, from Sri Lanka, from all these other ethnic minorities, and you're all considered to have a shared experience. And even though there's commonalities, because there's commonalities between all humans, in the media, and when I say media, I mean films as well as in the news, you kind of see the same tropes and stories about ourselves. I'm yet to see like a Black chick flick, a London Black chick flick. Most of the London films you see in cinemas follow the same theme of great films of kidulthood, Blue Story, and etc. But we're not allowed to tell about the complexities of our lives and our affairs, our dramas, our loves, our hates, our jealousies, etc.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that actually. And I think, given the time that we're kind of recording this podcast at the moment, it's good to see. I mean, I don't know if you saw sort of what Marcus Rashford is doing at the moment, and it's really great to see this sort of change. I think even in the media with the image of Black people. Because this podcast is looking at all professions, but if someone to say Black footballer 10 years ago, or even less than 10 years ago, you'd have a particular image or stereotype back in mind. But I think the stuff that Marcus Rashford is doing, even Raheem Sterling in his fight against racism, like just shows actually we're trying to shift that kind of perspective when it comes to how people are perceiving Black people. But you're completely right as well. Even the term Blacks, in some ways I have an issue with, because it's like, there's much more to it. We're not all the same person. We're not like one homogenous group with the same exact feelings.
Absolutely.
What ties us together is just shared experiences and sometimes a bias that we would face because of our race.
Yeah, I mean, and let's not get twisted. It's not a great shared experience to have. Like, I don't like the fact that you and I, or another black young man might meet ourselves and have a drink, and for 5 minutes we might be able to have shared experiences. But those shared experiences are, we probably know what it's like to be stopped for not having a, for no reason. We probably know what it's like to be discriminated for. But those aren't nice things to be bonding over. But that's an unfortunate situation of where we are. And yeah, it's an absolute personal pleasure to be on the Queen's Birthday Honours list with someone like Marcus, who's doing absolute bits in the, for the country, and changing the perception. And that's a great boon of social media. He's controlling his own narrative about himself because he's not dependent on, a newspaper to tell that story and to interpret it in its own lens, but he can go direct to millions of people and say, this is what needs to change, or this is what I'm doing, etc.
No, 100%. And yeah, so sort of touching on the MBE there, I mean, what is an MBE and kind of what does it mean? Because obviously you're now part of that famous alumni.
I am, and yeah, what does that mean? I'm still figuring it out. It's 2 weeks fresh, so I'm still kind of feeling my way through the club. So MBE is a member of the Order of the British Empire. It's I mean, people can kind of Google it or any other search engine for what it is in detail, but at its heart, it's a recognition from the state, from the Queen, about services you've done in a particular profession or thing. And mine was for services to healthcare leadership and global health policy, which was a great honor to receive, because yeah, I've done quite a bit in my own capacity and through work and through other things to try and advance things in the global health leadership space. And so to be recognized for that is an absolute honor and pleasure. But yeah, what exactly that means and for other people is something I'm still figuring out.
Okay. So, I mean, what kind of things have you done then, like to be worthy of an MBE?
Oh, that's an interesting word, to be worthy, because one person's worth is another person's, nonsense. So I think in the eyes of the people who decide these things, I've probably done something related to a fellowship that's supporting future health leaders across Africa. And that's something I run through a think tank called Chatham House. It was probably for a global health cafe community that I've kind of been running from London. And that's been for a few years now. For anyone interested in global health, we kind of come together, we network, we build, we do stuff. It's probably for an African healthcare hackathon that I run every year. Our first one was in Google Campus, and we've just been growing to work with the likes of Médecins Sans Frontières, the Red Cross, the WHO, lots of multinational organizations to help solve their problems, to hack their problems. It could have been for a website I run, globalhealthjobs.com, which does what it says on the tin. It's a resource for people interested in global health jobs. It could have been for a number of things, but I think in total it's been a nice thing to recognize some of those major things that I've been doing.
They all sound like awesome initiatives, to be fair.
Thank you.
I was recently involved in a scheme being run by a company called 1000 Black Voices, and it was, so touching on the whole healthcare side of things, it was actually really inspiring because I was essentially judging on a panel of 3, including Microsoft being one of the partners there, different entrepreneurs from Africa or coming out of Africa. And a lot of those different businesses were healthcare related ones. There was a couple coming from Nigeria, which I was like, this is a really great idea. And just kind of, I guess through their pitches, I was able to see actually the difference in the healthcare between, I guess, what is here and what is seen as very standard compared to certain regions in Africa. There was another group of entrepreneurs who came from Cameroon, and again, hearing a little bit more about what's going on there. So I think there's some really good things happening on the kind of global side of healthcare, and the think tank you mentioned, and you say the global health cafe, was it?
Yes, yeah.
So they sound like really kind of interesting things to get involved with, and like one of the things I'm trying to do in terms of what I do, which is I work in digital, working with businesses to help grow them and make sure that they're doing well, basically. Trying to work with more kind of African-based and African-led businesses, because there's a lot of great ideas, and you could tell that what's missing, just that little bit of extra support needed to actually turn those ideas into something that can actually be huge and global. So,
Sorry, and and it's a great thing you're doing. Social media, technology, digital can be the great leveler, and I stress the can be, because even with the decision of who to fund, who to support, there's inherent bias, unfortunately. But it's definitely a funnel for creative people back home and across the world and on the continent to deliver their ideas, and it reduces a lot of barriers to entry. It doesn't cost a lot to learn how to code, and well, it does in terms of opportunity cost and time, but otherwise it's a great leveler.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And so with the MBE, you spoke about when I said what made you worthy of getting an MBE, and you kind of mentioned that. Well, because I saw an article you actually wrote after you got your MBE with I think it was The Independent, where you spoke about, I guess, the paradox in some ways of getting an MBE. Can you just maybe expand on that a little bit and kind of your thinking and thought process there?
Yeah. So the obvious paradox is, it's got the word empire in it. It's related to recognizing officers of the British Empire, and the empire itself is a problematic thing for lots of people because of its colonialism, its past, what it did to control that power, what it still does to exert that power. And so for some people that can be very problematic. I absolutely understand that, and that's what I wrote in the article about that tension. What I wrote in the article as well about accepting it is, and there's also the dual identity crisis I face, having been born in Nigeria, but having been raised up in the UK here, is that, you don't find the average, and whatever the average means, but you don't find the average person in Nigeria or most parts of the continent, thinking about colonialism, post-colonialism, and they don't blame, problems on our old colonial masters. I mean, even taking the current, EndSars and brutality in Nigeria now, yes, there can absolutely be links made to the fact that the way police were structured or originally formed had, strong colonial links. However, I think you find most of the conversation leaning on the fact that it's because of our current leaders and our leadership, Nigeria's leadership, that is exacerbating the problem, not because of something that happened 100 years ago. And so it's in that same mold that I kind of, thought, I could understand and hold those historical links quite close, and deny me the opportunity to kind of have a bigger platform and more recognition, etc. But what's my longer term impact if I did do that, and if I did reject the MBE versus understanding some of those problems, still holding it true, but saying, that is a past that I'm not going to let hold power over me, and I'm going to kind of move forward. What's interesting is, so Dizzy Rascal also was on the MBE this year. Again, fantastic company to be amongst. But it's crazy what your mind like switches onto when you're really aware of something. So I was listening to a Skepta record the other day, and he says that he rejects the MBE. Actually, I think it's a recent song he has with another artist called Gets. Anyway, he says, there's a lyric where he says he rejected the MBE, and I was like, oh wow, I didn't know that. But I'm not a Skepta or Gets or Dizzy, so I don't have that platform to be able to reject an MBE. So yeah, even with all the tensions, I accepted it because of the bigger platform and ability to influence and impacts that it might give me.
Yeah, I think that's the thing as well, because that conversation can literally go on for days, couldn't it? But I guess the take that I have on it is trying to change from within is sometimes more powerful, or just as powerful as making a stand against. So what I mean by that is, again, with this podcast, I'm trying to bring Black people onto the podcast who are doing great things, but when people listen, they can be inspired by what they've achieved. So when it comes to an MBE, for example, seeing the likes of Dizzy Rascal, who, you know, we grew up listening to, and, you know, back when he had his first couple albums, no one would have thought Dizzy Rascal as an MBE. But see how he's inspired so many Black young people. And now that he's accepting MBE, they're going, okay, so it's not even just through music that I can be inspired. I can get to a level where I'm being recognized by, I guess, the wider UK British society. So I think that's kind of important. And, you know, when thinking about it, when I saw, you know, the recent of MBEs, I was like, I myself, if I was offered an MBE, I would take it, because, you know, we should be proud of our achievements. But I think we also have a responsibility to make sure that with our achievements, we use them for good, and we try and use that influence we do have to try and change that, either change the perception of Black people or bring more people up with us. I guess that's my kind of take on it.
Yeah, I would agree, because you look at you know, the kind of repurposing and reclaiming of things and of artifacts, of concepts. And if you take the concept of the British Empire and being a member of the Order of the British Empire, it strikes me as being a lot easier to change that definition of what an MBE holder looks like from being a holder of that MBE, as opposed to being on the sidelines or outside and writing opinion articles or writing things or trying to start discussions and campaigns about what an MBE holder should look like. You know, I get far more truck from being an MBE holder, being Black, being very proud to be Nigerian, being vocal about all those kind of things. And so that, I hope to some people, can redefine what an MBE holder looks like. And also, more importantly, what excellence in Britain looks like. Because that's another thing, right? I think the more, you know, maybe I'm getting too kind of grand with what I'm thinking here, but you think about your average person outside of M25, again, that's maybe too harsh in terms of average, but outside of the M25, you know, in Middle England, in Midlands somewhere, or in Yorkshire, they understand, you know, someone who isn't in urban culture like ourselves, perhaps, what they think of, okay, yes, this is the highest state honour, and this is what excellent British people look like. 10, 15 years ago, and if Black people always rejected the MBE, they would never understand that actually, yes, some of the people that the state considers excellent can be Black footballers, can be Black artists. So yeah, I think I'm getting further in shifting opinions with that title, or including all its problematic historical links, than without it.
Okay, very true. And so how's the reaction? You said it's only been 2 weeks, so it's still quite fresh. So kind of what's the kind of reaction been to you receiving your MBE?
Well, I mean, I think the human species is only ever so kind. So, you know, family and friends and those that are close to me will only ever say nice things. You know, the internet, in terms of its independent article response, was interesting. Quite a few bots, quite a few Brexiteers, quite a few reactionary comments to it, but you know, I think some of those people didn't actually even read it. They just kind of go on what they see on titles and headlines, and they make their comments. But otherwise, it's been good, and it's definitely you know, one of proudness. And again, I think there's such a difference of opinion from, you know, British Black people that may have a more intellectual, historical understanding, or you know, rebellious understanding about the empire and stuff, than my parents and people back home. They I think, like I said in my article, they have no, you know, very different relation to what that means, and they just see anything but they only see the positives from the MBE. So yeah, it's been a great reaction.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to hear. And I think, yeah, you're always going to, you know, get some people, and I think that's the age we're in, isn't it? Where not everyone reads the contents and the clickbait articles, titles, sorry. Just
Yeah, and
people.
you know what? I realized actually, and I've stopped it now more recently, but yeah, sometimes we do the same thing as well. We see a headline, and you kind of take it for gospel, but unless you actually read it, you realize it's something else completely different. But the other, I mean, news media outlets and stuff are private companies. That's something that I always wonder how much we actually twig and realize that, you know, the Sun, the Independent, the Guardian, the Daily Mail, they have no moral public you know, requirement to tell you anything but what they want to tell you. They employ journalists, they want to sell a product, but yeah, they're not, you know, moral guardians of the truth. It's a product that we believe that tells us an opinion or some facts, and we pay money to receive it. But it doesn't mean that they've got to, you know, they can color it however they want, which they do.
Yeah, I hear that, and I think that's one of the, again, going back to social media, which is a space I'm quite confident because of my job, but I think that's why it's a good thing, but also, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the recent social dilemma, but why also it's a risk because of how things get painted within social media. So one of the things with the recent goings on in Nigeria, which, to be honest, has had me feeling pretty low the last couple of days, couple of weeks actually, but especially the last few days. Like the fact that you can actually see what's going on within Nigeria from people who are actually there, I think is important, because you're getting the real life picture of it, as opposed to what a publication might try and twist or shift or try and explain based on their own, maybe, what's the word I'm looking for? Agenda, essentially. So yeah, I think that's I've noticed, like, with things like that, my first port of call is going to social media or going to people I know who are there and trying to find out actually what's going on before I start listening to the newspapers, because sometimes I'll only take one perspective of it.
Yeah, and you know, with platforms like this, it's so interesting. And I think as a species, we're still understanding its interaction, its interfaces, its quote unquote control of us, our emotions, our understanding and interpretation of the world. Because I look at the Nigerian army Twitter account and the Facebook account for the Nigerian army, and they're working overtime to control the narrative. And, you know, while access to these images and videos are great, because it means, you know, justice can't be denied, because, you know, we can see the quote unquote truth and evidence of things. It just makes also things quite problematic, because for those with, you know, power and resources, and also wisdom and, you know, more intelligence, they can control the narrative quite well. So one example that I've only just recently learned about is the current conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, where and I'm going to get it wrong, so I won't say it which country, but I know one of the countries has a bit more resources behind it, and they have more drones. So when they you know, bomb targets, their drone footage and the video, they can show it on their platforms to their country, and they can draw on the narrative that even if, because the other country doesn't have drones with HD cameras like that, it appears that the other country is actually quite superior because they've got more evidence that they're doing, you know, more. So yeah, it's a scary but interesting thing.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's the other side of the coin, isn't it? And as well with us, the way the algorithm works, where it feeds us content that it knows we're going to like, means that we end up in this bubble where, you know, there could be a complete, so everything I just said, ignore. But because, no, there's the other side of things which you may not be receiving, because the algorithm's only showing you what it thinks you'll like. So even when it comes to what's going on in the States, or even more close with the election, or even closer to home with COVID-19 and sort of COVID deniers and versus those who are like saying we must follow it. If you're someone who, basically there'll be people who are like, let's say an anti-vaxxer, they'll be getting content from other people similar to them, which just reinforces their narrative as opposed to seeing the wider, I guess, more holistic picture, like a more kind of central picture of like both sides of the coin, so they can actually make a rationalized decision based on it.
Yeah, and governments and policy is often behind innovation and technology. They then write rules to correct things or new products that eventually come in, and most governments are quite, aren't always that quick to write laws immediately as soon as new products come in. And so again, in the same way that, newspapers, they want to sell your product, these technology platforms also want to sell you services in terms of advertisement opportunities, etc. They've got no other commitment to truth or whatever apart from making you feel good and using their software and their platform. And that just bugs me out that that's such an interesting thing. And the major ones have I realize it's a David and Goliath battle. I'm going to war with an app that has had hundreds and millions of research into human behavior, psychology, from the most advanced behavioral scientists against me, who doesn't really, who's a human being, who has, endorphins, who has adrenaline, who has these things. And it's a battle I don't think many of us are winning.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's very interesting. And so going back to that COVID thing, and I'm quite interested actually to kind of get your kind of viewpoint on this, because given your position as a global health kind of advisor and expert in policy. So I was reading something recently about, when a vaccine does come, like how it's actually going to be distributed worldwide. And it did kind of pose a question. It's a bit like, how can we make sure that, when a vaccine does become available, that countries in Africa, like poorer countries, will get equal access to it as richer countries? I mean, do you have a kind of viewpoint on that or a perspective?
Yes and no. I think it's an interesting question, and you probably want to go to the root cause of that question, which is, you inherent in your question is a view of international solidarity. You have a view of global health security, which is that those that can't afford it should be offered it. They should be allowed access to it so that we're all protected. You look at the rise of populism in many, European states, in many parts of the West with Trump's election. That's not how people are generally feeling. People are, generally feeling that international solidarity isn't always working. Let's remove ourselves from the WHO. We don't have to, engage in the globalism because we're not all benefiting from it. And so your question about, or at least the premise of your question, is that those countries that can't afford the vaccine should have the vaccine because we're all one species and international solidarity and etc. I think, obviously, morally, I think it's the right thing to do. I think the argument, however, probably needs to shift to a global health security one, which is that to be secure in the West, to be secure in Pennsylvania, to be secure in Peckham, you need to also be secure in, Pakistan. And because we saw with its rapid rise that there is a very interconnected world, and we can't undo those things immediately. As soon as we can, planes will reopen, airways will reopen, pathways will reopen. So if we still want parts of that world, we have to secure other parts of the world, which is why the global health security framework is a very attractive one, because that's a conversation that kind of diverts the international solidarity one, which many politicians aren't winning the discussion on.
I understand. And so is that one of the kind of cool kind of conversations happening on the global health front right now?
Yeah, that's the conversation that gains you a little bit more track with the kind of governments that most we have ruling right now, which is about securing borders. The unfortunate downside with that kind of conversation is it's still a us and them divide, and it's kind of, let's keep the problem over there rather than over here. But I think there still needs to be some intellectual thought about the conversation with access to medicines, vaccines, etc., that doesn't rely on moral normative behaviors that we've had in the past. In the past, we've had it as a moral norm, as a known good thing, that yes, it is a good thing to provide aid, to do this, but we see, foreign aid budgets closing, we see America, retreating from the world, retreating from treaties, retreating from institutions. We see the same from Britain. So the arguments against that, I think, have to be a little bit different.
Yeah, I think with that, I think one of the things I was reading was like the US have already struck a number of like billion-dollar deals with for vaccine producers to basically for America, which is slightly outside. I know there's like other kind of this is showing my lack of knowledge overall. There's different groups and countries that have come together to form a collective. I think it's called like COVAX or something.
COVAX, yeah.
Is it COVAX? Okay, yeah. So I do know something.
Yeah, and that's been a good thing, because that's also the other counter you have to the nationalistic view of let's secure medicines for ourselves. It's realizing that some of the frameworks we have at the moment is and black swan events like this and big world events like world wars and stuff often reset institutions where you could probably point to things like the UN and say, with all the conflicts we have in the world, how good or bad is it, how functioning is it. So COVAX is an example of, if the institutions and the things we have right now don't support that, and people are pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, well, how else can we come together? How else can people that believe in international solidarity, in universalism, come together to achieve these same aims? And going back to Marcus Rashford, oh my goodness, I can't say enough about the guy. At least where we're standing right now with Twitter, what he's done is bringing together loads of corporates and people who are providing free school meals to children. So it's about finding other ways and frameworks to bring other like-minded people together.
Very true. So going full circle back to yourself and your role. So for those who are listening, who, from what you've said, it sounds interesting, this whole being involved in the policy decision making on the global health front. What advice would you give them to kind of get set on that journey?
So definitely network. You don't know what you don't know, and I don't know if things have changed nowadays, but it's not like the pathway to this kind of position is made clear. It's obvious. It's and which is why I hope to do stuff like this to make it a bit clearer as to how gain entry into these spaces. But yeah, and there's often like a generational thing, because my parents didn't know about this kind of worlds, and so I had to find out for myself through networking. Most parents, immigrant parents, think about law, engineering, medicine, etc.
That's why you did pharmacy, isn't it?
yeah. I had to satisfy them. Although if I was given free reign, I probably would have picked something random like classics or geography. And I say random, but to them random. So yes, it's about pathways into these positions. So networking, try and understand. Oh, and then another advice as well is, try and generate evidence of how you can fit into that world. And so you might want to write, policy papers or a blog that explores policy, because when you then want to apply for roles, if you've got something on your CV that shows, look, I am an independent thinker, or I know how to do research, or I know how to bring up policy suggestions, then you get a bit further than someone who hasn't.
Yeah. Okay. And what's next for you? What's your future ambitions?
Oh, what's next? To get through the coronavirus pandemic in one piece is definitely one thing, and with my sanity in check. The PhD is obviously interesting. I'm looking forward to that kind of learning journey. And then selfishly, yeah, like the MBE, because I actually knew about it in May. That's when the Queen's birthday originally is, and that's when they normally release the honours, but they delayed it because of the obvious coronavirus. And so I've definitely been on a bit more of a journey about thinking about it, and I'm now at the point where, you know, I've accepted it, I'm happy with it, and the kind of hard worker in me is thinking about, well, what next for British elitism might be available to me. So yeah, you know, trying to do more of the same.
That sounds good. Yeah, hopefully we'll get you back on a podcast at some point, and we can kind of hear how changing from within is going, because yeah, it shows that from what you've said so far, you know, you were born in Nigeria, you came here, you found your passion in terms of global health, and you've stuck to that. You've done a number of different initiatives, and that's led to you getting into a position where you actually influence the decisions being made. So I think that's a fantastic journey to kind of go through. And I think for people listening, it shows, because also the fact you did pharmacy, you kind of, again, went slightly a different route, although linked to it. You don't always have to know, I guess. I mean, actually, did you know from young this is what you wanted to do? Or did it kind of change? Because the point I was about to make was, you may not know what you want to be doing at this stage, whatever stage the listener is in their life, but if you find your calling further down the line, or if you find something that motivates or inspires you, there's no reason why you can't pivot and still make, you know, great achievements.
Yeah, so no is the direct answer to the question. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. It changed, and, you know, new ideas come and new ideas go. But the level of ambition was always there, and it's still there, and the form that it takes, you know, changes from time to time. The other thing that was quite clear, though, with the move away from pharmacy, was knowing that, and I remember either hearing it in a song or just feeling it in my heart, reading it somewhere, that, you know, the typical working life, you know, the 9 to 5, could be made so much more enjoyable if I was doing what I loved. And, you know, I knew I couldn't be a professional footballer, so I knew, look, you know, I like this kind of debate, in this kind of problem solving, creatively, policy type stuff, as geeky as it sounds. Rather than do the clinical pharmacy stuff, let me try that, because then it'll just be a reinforcing iterative thing, right? Where you're actually doing what you love, so you work a bit harder and you get, you know, so if anyone's listening, please, whatever your passion is, even if it was something at 11 years old that you no longer do, you'll probably get further in life and career, and also just joy, if you can pivot back to it, or you know, do it in some way, because yeah, you know, your work will just be a lot more better, you'll feel better, and you'll do more, and etc. etc.
Yeah, no, I hear that still. It's great advice too. So yeah, I mean, I really appreciate your time today.
No, thanks for the invite.
We actually covered quite a lot there, and it's definitely an interesting conversation. So how can people get hold of you? How can people find you?
If they're that crazy, then they can look me up on LinkedIn or Twitter. I am _Ade Busi. That's Alpha Delta Echo, Bravo Unicorn, Sierra Unicorn Yankee India. Yeah, I'm pretty accessible, I think, and if I'm happy to help most people. So yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. But it's been great having you on. And yeah, I think the advice that you gave to the guests and the listeners, there's really some good tidbits out of that. So yeah, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
This has been the Bean Bane podcast, and I hope everyone has a good day.